The Tower Tour, written by Jayne Woodhouse, read by Rosannah Lenaghan. In a corner of the cathedral, people were gathering, ready for the next tour of the tower to begin. A woman sat a little way off, watching as the guide arrived and checked their tickets. She was pleased to see it was the man called Ralph, because unlike some of the others, he always found a way to make the driest facts sound interesting. When she saw Ralph unlock the heavy wooden door, she knew it was time to get ready. She waited until the visitors started to file through, then got up and walked briskly over. If she timed it just right, she knew she could slip inside at the last minute and join the tour without paying. There! It was so easy. She wondered why no one else had ever thought of it. Inside the doorway, there was the boring part to listen to. All the guides had to explain the safety procedure, but Ralph was the only one who tried to make this fun. "And if anybody gets stuck at the top," he recited, and she mouthed along with the punchline, "I hope you've brought your parachute to get back down." She made a point of laughing loudly and was pleased to see him look around to see who'd enjoyed the joke. The first section was easy, an ordinary staircase up into the roof space. Even the fattest Americans could manage this, but she liked to spot the people who would be in trouble later. There was an overweight woman with a backpack, she might be the one, or the elderly man with a bald head who was already out of breath. She noticed a teenage boy hanging back to play around with some new-fangled gadget. She went across and gently touched his arm to tell him to hurry along. The way he jumped and shot off towards his parents. You'd think she'd thrown boiling water over him. They were in a little huddle now, the boy gabbling and pointing in her direction, while the adults kept staring at her. She put out her hands to show that she hadn't meant any harm, and was glad to see them stride off to catch up with the rest. The staircase led them out onto the walkway across the nave. She liked to hear the tourists gasp when they realised how high they'd already climbed. This was one of her favourite parts of the tour. She loved the view down through the stone arches into the body of the cathedral. The sounds of voices and mobile phones dimmed into silence. The weight of past centuries almost tangible. Ralph gave everyone time to take photographs. It took longer every time, especially now there were so many more Chinese and Japanese visitors. They only seemed to see the world through their cameras, snapping endless shots of themselves and each other, never pausing to simply look. She had some fun moving around, trying to position herself in the background of some of their pictures without anyone noticing. What would they say later, she wondered, when they looked and saw another image on their screens? At the foot of the tower, they stood in a huddle, while Ralph launched into the story of how and when it had been built. She picked out a young couple with matching tattoos who'd already started to look bored and crept over and whispered a few words in their ears. "Now, I don't suppose anyone can tell me the name of the bishop who ordered the construction of the tower," said Ralph, asking the question nobody ever answered. "Bishop Henslem in 1286, shouted the tattooed man. He looked every bit as surprised as his partner. "Very good. Well done," Ralph applauded. "Not many people get that right." The look of total confusion on the couple's face was priceless, and she stayed close to catch their whispered conversation. "However did you know that?" "I've no idea, it just popped into my head." "Didn't know you liked history." "I don't." "Well, how did you know that then?" "I told you." It had certainly stirred up something between them. But at least they were now both paying attention to Ralph. He was describing the tons of stone brought across the channel and then taken overland on ox carts, the stonemasons who had left their special marks in hidden places, and the hundreds of workers, so many that a whole village had sprung up in the close to house and feed them. She listened carefully to spot the small differences he added each time, pleased with how well he told the story. It helped her picture again those first worshippers treading mud and straw into the nave, smothering the fragrance of incense with their stink of wood smoke and unwashed bodies, gazing awestruck at this monument to a fearsome god. Many people were still moved by the sight today, she knew. although it was no longer the fear of hell that kept them coming back. From then on, the climb became much harder. First, there were 2 steep wooden stairways, the drop clearly visible through the treads, which had to be negotiated in single file. Teenage boy raced up them both, showing that lithe agility the young are blessed with, while his mother yelled at him to stop. The woman was tempted to run alongside him, but she knew that would be showing off. Besides, it was always more fun to hang back and laugh at the stragglers. She liked to be at the end, letting her hand linger along the handrail. After everyone else had gone ahead, the wood felt warm from their touch, as if a human pulse was still beating through the grain. There was another pause before the most challenging part of all, a narrow spiral staircase that twisted almost vertically upwards. She'd known many tourists give up at this point. Once, a young woman had had hysterics, and it had taken 4 people to guide her back down while she refused to open her eyes. Some of today's group were clearly unsettled, wondering if they weren't overreaching themselves. Still, nobody dropped out, although Backpack Woman and Bald Man both needed their partners to persuade them to carry on. The woman managed to insert herself in the queue between the Bald Man and his wife. He was going slower and slower, his breath coming in great rasping gasps, and was soon holding up everyone behind him. She gave him a gentle push in the back, urging him to hurry along. "What the hell are you pushing me like that for?" He found enough puff to turn and yell over his shoulder. He was looking directly past her at his wife. "I never touched you, love." She looked dumbfounded. "You gave me a right old shove." The woman who'd done the pushing said nothing. She tried to hide her delight at the wife getting the blame. The 2 of them looked as if they were going to have a big argument afterwards, which made it all the better. At the top of the stairwell was a small door, which Ralph opened with an enormous iron key. A blast of cool air swept over them. Then they stepped out into the open, shielding their eyes from the bright light. She heard the usual cries of amazement at the first sight of such a spectacular view. Sometimes, when the clouds were low, you might get nothing for your hard work, other than mist and drizzle. But today, they really were fortunate. The weather had lifted to reveal a clear vista that stretched all the way along the valleys as far as the mountains. You could see the edges of the town straggling out into the countryside, and then the patchwork of fields stitched together by trees and hedgerows, changing colour with the seasons. There was a walkway along the 4 sides of the tower, with enough space for everyone to move around. The parapet with its wide crenellations reached up to chest height, but beyond that there was nothing between them and the huge drop to the ground below. Teenage boy was leaning too far over. She knew only too well the danger he was in and went to grab his jacket and pull him back. But his mother got there first. The boy shrugged her off roughly and walked away while she yelled at him for being so stupid. The woman was surprised to see them behave like that in front of her, but neither of them seemed to care that she was standing nearby. The tourists spread out, chatting animatedly and taking photographs, pointing out landmarks while the woman stood apart. She watched the people in families and couples or with friends. It seemed they all had somebody, and that she was the only one alone. Even Ralph found ways to bring his wife and grandchildren into his commentary, which showed he had someone waiting for him at the end when the tour ended. She hovered around the different groups, longing to reach out to them, hoping they would pause and draw her in. But it never happened. She tried to join in a conversation with some students, but they only carried on talking over her and never even looked in her direction. Backpack Woman seemed friendly enough, and she tapped her on the shoulder as if to say, "I'm here too. Look at me." But the woman just brushed off the place her hand had touched and linked arms with her husband. At these times she was so overcome with a feeling, like the memory of a sharp pain, so strong it almost caused her to double over. This, she thought, must be what they call loneliness. The woman turned aside and walked off by herself towards the far corner. She was always drawn to this spot, although it was the one place that the tourists tended to avoid. Here she knew she would find gaps in the stonework wide enough to place your feet, making it possible to climb upwards. She found herself taking the first step and then another, as some hidden pattern began to pull her higher. Now she was standing on the very top of the wall. Nobody tried to stop her, and no voice was raising to telling her to come down. She felt the rush of wind pushing against her, causing her to sway and nearly topple to the sickening drop below. But she didn't falter. For an instant she felt a barely reachable memory of the first time she had done this very same thing, when she had stood at the highest point, holding her arms wide, ready to take one final step forward, believing she would soar through the air like a bird. And then it was done. The woman was standing in the corner of the cathedral as the tourists emerged through the doorway at the end of their tour. They were chatting and laughing, thrilled with the spectacle they had seen, all just relieved the climb was over. She let the living flow through her and past her, before merging back into the shadows. She wouldn't have long to wait. The next tower tour would be starting soon.